Now, the next logical thing for us to learn about is using Ansible loops to repeat things over and over. And kind of like with conditionals, it feels a little backwards to me because just like with conditionals, you define what needs to be done in a particular task, and then afterwards you add one of these sort of things to say, like, do all of these things with this list of items, or, with the contents of this file, or with this sequence of numbers. So it's again a little backwards, but it's very readable. And so when we go about doing it's not terribly difficult to look at a configuration file and see what it's going to do. And now I'll just do this really quickly. The idea of a loop should make sense. Even if you're not a programmer, being able to do the same thing over and over and over is the reason we have automation tools to begin with. For example, let's say this is the Jones family. Mom and dad have their baby. Every morning they have to get their other kids ready for school. So they need to pack a sandwich, and they need to kiss a child on the cheek, and then send that child off to school. So they do the same exact thing for each child. And if we're doing a programming version of this, we would want to just be able to say, do this process this number of times, or with this data set of children, rather than going through over and over and over and writing out the process that you have to do for each child. In fact, I didn't write out each process because even just writing it out as the example was kind of monotonous. So you should get the idea of what a loop is for. It's to save us time so we don't have to do the same thing over and over manually. And it's really easy to do in Ansible. So let's check that out, and we'll create a few loops using different kinds of loop things, like we can loop with items, we can loop with files, we can loop with a sequence of numbers. It's really easy to do, so let's check it out. Before we get started actually creating a loop, I wanted to show you, I downloaded this loops documentation file. This is directly from the Ansible website. You can actually go to the Ansible website if you want to download this, but I saved it on the desktop so you can look at it, because there are so many different types of loops available in Ansible, and it would be silly for us to go over all of the various types of loops that you can use. I just want to go over the standard few that are going to give you the comprehension of how loops work. But I wanted you to have this file because there are so many kinds of loops that Ansible is capable of doing. So we're going to start out just doing standard loops, and you can look in the documentation if you want, but I like to learn by doing. So the first thing we're going to do is create a file. So vi test.yaml. You don't have to name it test.yaml, by the way. I just always do. It does have to be a YAML file, but it doesn't have to be test. That's just what I tend to do every time. However, you do have to start with the 3 dashes every time. That tells it that it's an Ansible file or a YAML file. And then we're going to say hosts. I'm just going to do Ubuntu because this is going to be a demo, so I'm going to use the apt module, which we know only works in Ubuntu or in Debian systems. Let's see, I'm going to say become yes, because we're going to have to become root on the remote system in order to use apt. And then tasks, and we'll start with a task called install stuff. We're going to use the apt module. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say name equals, and then I'm going to do a variable substitution. Now, I know I haven't defined any variables yet, but it's a special variable name called item. I'll close that variable substitution. Then we're going to say update cache equals yes, and state equals latest. And now here's where we say with items. Now this works just like the when statement when we are doing conditionals, whereas it comes at the end after you define what's going to be done, but then it says with items, and we put a list of various items that we want to do. This is just called a standard loop when you say with underscore items. Let's actually install a few packages. Let's say we're going to install Vim. That's my favorite text editor. Come over here, another dash. We're going to install Nano, which is a popular text editor that most people use on the command line. And let's also do Apache. Oop, I'm going to spell it right. Apache 2. And I think that's going to be good. All right, so we're going to do this. Now, what should happen is it's going to go through and it's going to run the apt name equals and do one for each of these. So it's going to run this task 3 times using every one of the items that we've put in this list. Okay, and it's going to run it with update cache and install the latest version. So that should be clear, but let's actually see it work because seeing is believing. So it starts up, it gathers facts, and now it's doing that task, again, 3 times. So it's going to go through and install each file that we specified in the list, all right? And it didn't give us an individual, like what happened on each loop item. It just says that it did it and that there was a change. So our recap says it did two things okay. Now the two things that did okay was gather the facts and then do the install. So there were no errors at all. And there was a change on one of the two tasks. Again, it was this task. Even though this task ran 3 times, it's still considered one task. The install stuff task is just one. All right, so there was a change where it installed those packages. If we run it again, we should expect to see no changes because those packages are already installed. So it'll say OK too because it was able to do both of these tasks, but there were no changes. So it's really quick because there was nothing for it to install. And that's as easy as it is to install a loop using these, item list things. That's just a standard loop. Now the other loops are very similar, but slightly different, especially with how you define them inside the task. So let's make a change. We can start with the same file, test.yaml, but instead of installing stuff, let's say show file content. All right, and instead of apt, we're going to get rid of this. And here we're just going to use the debug module because it shows us some stuff right on the screen. So debug message equals, and then we're going to say item. Again, it's that special variable that we use with list items. Now, if we just left it like this, it would say with items, and it would be message equals Vim, message equals Nano, message equals Apache 2, just a string. That's the string we would get. However, we're not going to do that. We're going to say with file, and backspace over this. We're going to say file1.txt and file2.txt. Now what this is going to do, rather than a list of the text that we put right in this file, it's going to take the contents of this file and substitute the contents of this file up here where our special item variable is. All right, so right now those don't exist, but let's save this, and we know that it's going to be looking for file1.txt and file2.txt. So let's say file1.txt, and we're just going to say this is file number 1. Save that. vi file2.txt. This is file number 2. We just made that on 2 lines so you can see that it does the entire file. And so now we have file 1, file 2, and test.yaml. So let's say Ansible playbook test.yaml, and this should go pretty quick because we're just going to display using the debug command. And let's see if it worked right. We said, okay, this is the task. Again, it's one task, but it's running 2 times because we defined 2 files. The item is, this item is file number 1. So it shows us what the item itself was, the contents of that file, and then it shows us the message. So it kind of shows us the same thing twice. But the message is, this is file number 1. Down here, same thing, but it's file number 2. And this looks a little confusing, but if you look closely, you can see what's going on. It says, this is file, and then \n for a new line, number 2. So it crammed it all into one line, but it did read the entire file. All right, so this is just like going through a list of files that you have here. And then lastly, you can actually do a sequence too, which is the kind of traditional loop. I think when I think of a loop, I think of like a sequence of numbers or something. So let's do that last one really quick. We can see how a loop sequence works in Ansible. And let's actually continue to use the debug module because that's really perfect for seeing our results in real time. So we'll get rid of that. We're going to change this to, instead of with file, we're going to say with sequence, colon, and then we basically say start equals 1, end equals 10, and what this should do is it should give us a loop that starts with 1 and goes all the way to 10. Now since it's a loop, it's going to run this task every iteration of this, so we should see 10 different loops, and it should say message. Actually, let's add a little to the message so we can see message. This is loop item, so it should say this is loop 1, this is loop 2, and if we're right, that's what the result should be. So let's say Ansible playbook test.yaml runs through, and sure enough, let's see if it worked. So we go up here, gathered facts just fine, then it says Ubuntu, that's the computer we're doing, item 1. So item 1, message this. Oh, it actually didn't go through this. Why did we not get the actual full message? Message equals, let's put this in quotes. There, now we should see the entire message. And sure enough, all right. So the message is this is loop 9, this is loop 8, this is loop 7, and you can see this is the item. It iterated through every single one. So there's lots of different ways to do loops. I encourage you to look at this file because this file will show you all the various types. You can, do while, until, all sorts of things like that. It's powerful, but depending on what you need to do, there's going to be the best way that you can use a loop for your particular thing. Again, just remember that the loop definition comes at the end of your task, right? So you need to define the task, and then the way that you loop it comes after you say what module and what to do. It's just like that conditional. It comes at the end of the task. So we looked at 3 different ways to do loops, with items, which is the standard loop, with file, which means you can give it a list of files. There's also file glob that's worth checking out. So you can say, go into this folder full of files and do every one of those files, which is very convenient. You don't have to spell out the name of every file. Then, of course, sequences of numbers are very, very powerful. You can also skip numbers. You can say, like, start at 1 and go to 10 and then set a stride of 2, which means it'll skip every other one. It'll only do every other one. So check out that document because loops, there's tons of different things you can do with loops, but now you know how to go about making loops in your playbooks. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.